Okay, so Ciara and Muireann, thank you for joining me today. This week's hot topic is about organisation and time management, and it's an interesting one because when we originally were developing this programme, we did survey with students and we asked what is the top skill that every student needs to have. And this is what came out on top. 27% said organisation and time management, because I think if you've got this under your belt, it impacts everything else, you know. So I guess that's why it's one of the most important ones. And more recently then, over the last week, while we've been out on campus and we've been promoting help, we asked students, do you procrastinate with college work? And I think 89% said yes. So I mean, I don't know who the 11% were who said no, because I don't know anyone who doesn't procrastinate, but hopefully that's what we're going to talk about today, is finding ways to not procrastinate and get stuck in and manage all of those different demands that we have. So I am, I'll just stop screen sharing there. I am a learning technologist with the Teaching and Learning Centre. So I suppose I'm here just to chip in the odd thing around some technology that can support with this, but really it's you two that are that I'm hoping to hear from. So firstly, if you'd like to just introduce yourselves and just talk a little bit about who you are. And Ciara, will we start with you?
Yes, my name is Ciara Guiney. I am a research academic psychologist, but I am part of the Teaching and Learning Centre's team supporting students with academic skills. Most of my work is done online with students, so that's it.
Okay, and Muireann?
Yeah, so my name is Muireann. I'm an associate lecturer with lifelong learning in the early childhood program, and I'm just on the very last legs of a PhD, which explores children's rights to education for sustainable development in early childhood. So I know a lot about procrastination.
Yeah, and yeah, so that's the very demanding end of things, but obviously you've come through and had to develop a lot of strategies to get to the point that you're at now. So that's what we'll hopefully draw on today. So what I'm going to do is, we have some questions here that have been prepared for us, and I'm going to share my screen again just for a moment. And Ciara, if you'd maybe like to read the first one, and Muireann, then if you answer first, and then we can, but we'll both answer anyway.
What do you think are the most common pitfalls students encounter in terms of time management?
So.
Okay. Well, if I think about my journey as an undergrad up, I guess probably one of you know, the greatest pitfalls I had was leaving everything to the last minute, which I think, you know, it's quite helpful now that I'm teaching with lifelong learning, so that I can kind of advise students now, you know, I know that we're just, you know, on week 1 or week 2, but this is when you need to do your reading. So I think, you know, one of the greatest pitfalls, in my opinion, is leaving stuff to the last minute. And then, you know, what that leads to is you know, panic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Ciara, over to you.
I would fully agree with what Muireann says. I undertook my own PhD journey. Well, I know I'm out of it now a little while, but that procrastination is huge when you're coming down to sit down to look at a piece of work. And I think we tend to consider everything from the end product. And that sometimes can leave us even more overwhelmed that we won't get started. And it's important to look at the over-end product, then park it, and then look at the little bits that are going to inform that end product. And I think, I know for myself with procrastination, it's huge, and the effect it has on you emotionally while you're trying to deal with it means that you don't get any work done at all.
Yeah.
And you do definitely panic then, and then everything, it's like putting yourself in a whirlpool, and you're not able to get out of it because you're lost in this emotion, I'm not going to get this done. Whereas in actual fact, you probably do have a little bit more time on your hands, but the procrastination has taken up a huge amount of it. So it is a big one to consider. I suppose one of the things is acknowledging at the very start that some or a lot of them are going to experience procrastination, and to be aware that it's a normal part of the process of engaging with a new topic, that when they look at an assignment brief, that there is going to be that element of, oh my God, what's that about? And then all of a sudden, but not to accept, yes, that's part of this journey. It's a case of get out your highlighter pen. What are the main things that I will look at in this assignment? What are the key words? What are the essay terms, or like, is it critically evaluate, analyze, or describe? What am I supposed to be doing here? And I think that helps deal with that procrastination. But I suppose when you're reading, there is such an overwhelming amount of reading to do in preparation for assignment. It's about being aware that strategically they need to think, right, okay, I've got to read this, but it's critically reading the information. I'm looking for specific information in relation to my assignment, but it's also using your highlighter pen to highlight the main areas, but even taking that time to put that sentence or paragraph in your own words into the assignment, and to start the writing process first. Because students, I've noticed, my students and even myself, we get lost in the reading part. Oh, I must read that. And then we say, oh, that part might be relevant. And then we don't think to highlight or put a note or have a separate document where we can say, yes, there's information on page such and such of that journal article that's relevant to my assignment that we can go actually back to. And then that can help manage that procrastination. I feel that's from my own experience and how I've tried to encourage students.
I think there's an art, though, in highlighting. You know, like I remember at the very beginning, I would almost literally highlight the whole paper because I didn't really know what I was looking for. Yeah. So I think there's a kind of art, there's an art to that as well. And particularly at the beginning, it's a skill that kind of needs to be also addressed.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. And I suppose that's part of that process of the learning outcomes for those assignments, that they're developing that as part of that.
Yeah.
And for them to be aware that those skills are being developed slowly, that they're not going to develop overnight. You know, sometimes they want to get to the end of the road before they've gone all the weavy bends before they get there.
So they're really great points. So really, I suppose what we're talking about, the procrastination is a huge thing, and maybe that almost like freezing. I always find it's nearly like you've got, what it's the fight, but freeze is the third one. I think that's key. And then you said about the overwhelm, which I suppose is what leads to that procrastination, is that being overwhelmed. So two things to students should probably look out for and realize that they're definitely not alone in it anyway. It's almost universal. So if we go back now to just moving on to question 2, and Muireann, I'll ask you to read this one if you can.
Okay, what are some strategies around time management that really work in your experience?
And for me, the first thing I would recommend is make sure you have a diary. In that diary, an academic diary can be really, really useful because it starts in September and finishes in August rather than running from January to December. And in that diary, literally getting everything documented. When are your classes? When are assignments due? Putting in time for yourself, allocating time in your diary for yourself, for self-care, depending, as Muireann was saying, like some topics can be quite heavy. And if a topic is heavy, you do need to have some time to yourself. I would work with to-do lists. They can be, I have found, like, you know, trying to prioritize what needs to be done each week down and breaking it down to each day, and then using your pen, or I find sticky notes are quite handy electronically if you don't want to do a paper copy, and there's ways to use strike throughs to delete stuff so you can see the progress. Oh gosh, someone's I have the paper ones as well, and I also have an electronic version that I can, and I have post-its all over my screen, so that can be really useful. I find that allowing yourself, allocating yourself specific times to work on an area and not getting absorbed in it that 3 hours later you discover you've 3 hours done, because our brains don't function in that way. It's very important to have breaks, to have routine as part of your day. So like if you're a person, for me, I get up very early in the morning. So I find my first thing out of bed has to be to take my dog for a walk. And that's my routine: walk, do my exercises, and then get my breakfast and then work. So whatever routine, you find out what routine works best for you yourself. Like you have to, my routine might not work for somebody else if they're up till 1 or 2 in the morning, whereas I'm up from 5 or 6 in the morning. So you work out what's best for yourself. It's very important around time management, especially if you've a paper to write, that for me personally, that I start early. And this is where that helps with procrastination as well, because if you start early, it's never initially going to make sense on a paper. You're not going to you might do a mind map beforehand, but then as you're reading, you might find other ideas that you want to include in certain sections. So for an essay with regards to time management, I sort of find that start writing early, read resources. So read the assignment brief a number of times beforehand, with the view that when I'm doing reading, then I take that stuff on board to remind me, oh, TMA or assignment, yeah, that might be assignment. And you're wanting to cut down on time.
Muireann, would you like to kind of, so just strategies around time management that you have found, because there's loads of them out there, but what, in your experience, what has really genuinely worked?
Yeah, so I would agree with kind of a lot of the points that were raised so far that Ciara brought up, so I won't go back on them. But I think possibly the most helpful thing for me was, let's say, even just in relation to the PhD. So I kind of saw the end date, and then I worked back and had, quite specific dates for when chapters were due in. So just in relation to kind of, the use of a diary. And it's interesting because I think, let's say if my mother was here, she'd fall around the place laughing at me being so specific about dates, because it's not a natural thing for me at all. But I can genuinely say that it's what has got this PhD over the line.
Can I just add one more point on that around the diary? I have found as well in my writing, it's always important to add extra time along with using the diary. So like you have in your dates, like, so say if you think it's going to take 2 weeks to do something, allocating an extra week because the unexpected can arise.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose undergrads, if we're looking at that, this is for all students. I suppose a lot of students, they won't have, like when you're talking about PhD level, you have that little bit of kind of more autonomy, I suppose, in terms of setting dates. They might not have that, but it's still, those principles are the same. What is the end date, and work backwards, and use things like a diary. So, and that might be a tangible one, but there's also obviously, if you're using Outlook, you've got your calendar in there. If you're using Google Drive, your calendar there, link them all together. I would always have it always digital, because I will lose a diary. So that's why I'd be such a supporter of like technology options. And the same with the to-do lists. And there's loads of them in there in this topic, and in our digital skills topic, we have recommendations around to-do lists. that are online and that can be integrated with other things, and they can be so useful. And I think in terms of procrastination as well, we talk a little bit about the Pomodoro technique, and I would be a great advocate for that in terms of just getting you past the blank page. Like literally just sit and do 25 minutes and don't fall down the research hole doing so much reading that you're putting off writing. Like even sometimes I'll just make myself just write what you already know on this and see where you're at, just to do something. Because like you say, I think a lot of these strategies, it is about, like you said, Muireann, it's not natural to you to be really organized with dates, but sometimes we nearly need to, like, it's like carving something out of a rock sometimes, trying to develop these strategies, because it is maybe going against the grain. But once you kind of just find what's working for you or where the gaps are that you need to address, that can really help then in moving you forward.
There was something that I thought was also helpful, was that, well, I mean, again, of course, it depends on when assignments are given and all of this kind of thing. But I noticed, I kind of noted, or something that I thought was helpful was after having a lecture, that, you know, you might write a piece from that lecture. You know.
Oh, you're back.
I was just so excited that I flew off with my next tip. But what I just had wanted to say was, perhaps in that regard, if you are kind of an undergraduate, perhaps it might be helpful that, you know, what you write is, you know, some kind of a short summary or something like that of the lecture that you've just done, because chances are in that content will be something, you know, for whenever you get the assignment. So that might also be something.
Absolutely, and it saves you time then later. We have that, I think, in our note-taking section, which is in our next topic. We talk a little bit about that taking notes it's not just in class writing the notes, it's the before and after the lecture, and that's what cements it and helps us to process it. And like you say, you can draw on it then when it comes to, it saves you a lot of time in the long run, even though at the time you think, I don't have time for that. It's false economy to think that you would be better to do it. So moving on to question 3, and I think, Ciara, we're back to you to read this one, I think.
So what advice would you give in terms of organising college work and resources?
Okay, so I guess this kind of lends itself a little bit to some of the things that you were saying earlier, Ciara. But in terms of kind of resources, or how I have done it, is usually, you know, kind of that, you know, the kind of the big rabbit hole moment. So when you've got all of the reading going on, what I have done is I've read it, and usually for the most part, I can establish some kind of idea or theme, or something comes up in my head that I'm thinking, oh yeah, so this is about, so let's say this is about children's participation rights, and this is about something else. So I usually kind of mark that as, you know, and I create a folder. So I create folders with, you know, kind of the themes. You know, again, I'm kind of being specific because my head is so research orientated, but I put my resources, I file them under particular ideas. So under particular topics or how they've been discussed, that's how I file them. I know that you have the date and the name. So I usually have the name, but what I also have had to do is I've had to put in red because there is a chance that, oh, I did read this before. Yeah. So, and also it looks really good when you open the folder and you see all these red. So, you know, that's kind of a nice pat on the back. So I organize my resources for the most part. I don't print them out anymore. I did at the beginning, I had them printed out and I had a whole notebook system, you know, but it was the same concept of organizing stuff under themes in a way that I could retrieve them.
And that's a really good way. You've actually added something else now for me to add to my little system, which is great. I have occasionally put things in by themes as well, but and that's actually great the way you put in your read. I like that. Now that's something. See, there's learning in everything, and learning never stops regardless of what stage you're at. I suppose I'm going to be repeating myself. I do tend to put the year and author name on the papers and a bit of the title. I like the idea Muireann has about putting read on when you have read it, or even putting a bit of the theme on it. The folders is a huge thing, and that is just so easy to do online. Like it's incredibly easy to organize yours. It's just a matter of when you're doing it, don't leave it till the last minute to organize them. I organize as I download, so if I download and read, then I do my next step, year, author, name a journal, and then allocate it to the folder that I want it in. So you're not going searching for stuff. I know it's very easy when we download and just save to a folder on its own, that they come through with maybe partial names on them, or they'll have DOI numbers on them, and then you don't know what you're looking for at all. So with regards to resources, not being able to find things can be really unhelpful as part of assignments. Let me think.
Just in relation
that would be
to
the best step. Pardon?
Sorry, I was just going to say, I was just thinking, just in relation to when you organize your folders into themes, like, also just to say that at the beginning, when you're at the very beginning and you don't maybe necessarily even know what the theme might be.
Yes.
Well, the thing about that is you can make up the themes, as in what you read from the paper and what you get from the paper, that's your theme. It's your theme. And it can be easily the case that at the very beginning, you might have 50 themes, right? So every paper might have its own idea. But the thing is that as you keep reading, your folders start merging. So like it's an ongoing process. So at the beginning, you read a paper, okay, that was on this, okay, that was on that. So you have a load of folders. But as you keep going, you can start merging it. So it's like a very, very impressive system you can have by the end of it all.
Mm-hmm. And it's useful too to have that system in relation to specific assignments. I always keep my drafts in the one folder related to a specific assignment. And I had a very bad experience in the course of one of my undergraduate assignments. Somebody came to the house just as I was about to in the final stages of getting ready to submit something, and this girl said to me, "Oh, don't work too late tonight." And I thought, "Oh no, I'm just ready to submit." And I went back in and I discovered that I had managed to save my document. I had cut half the document away and saved it, that I had lost half the work and not realized I had lost it all. And then I ended up working all night. So what I do now, every day I start my drafting to organize my assignments. I start my writing early, and every day I work on that assignment, and I do it with the year, the month, the day. So it'll be in order. So you'll have the most recent document at the very bottom. So every day I put a new date on it for today's date. So it means that if my computer crashes, which can happen, and it leaves you in a complete emotional mess, or if you make a mistake, you always have the last day's information on the previous document. And you can take stuff out, and you could be in the middle of editing and think, right, no, I took that bit out, but I know I have it in a previous draft, and you can bring it back in. So it can be really useful to do that. And I think that's an important way to organize, especially assignments, so that you always have the most recent document. And then by doing them with the year, month, date thing, you can be certain that you're putting in the final version of your document.
Mm-hmm. Well, just I suppose to add from that, from the technological point of view, that I would be a great advocate for, if you use OneDrive or Google Drive, that will auto save, so you'll always have it, but you can revert to previous versions as well. And we have in one of the videos that we have, I think in this module, but also in the digital skills, it gives the instructions on how to do that. So it's not that it's after you close a document, that version saves, and you can go back to any previous version that you from any previous thing. And yeah, again, with my tendency to lose things and break things, I the online, the cloud is the way to go. I wouldn't be without it, because
for technologically minded people, students, the cloud is a good way to go.
But I mean, it's almost that you can have your desktop version of Word linked to OneDrive, so it's not even that you have to be technically minded. It might take a few minutes to set it up and make sure that you're in, but really, if you have a look at the video, I think we have it down to 1.5 minutes, and it can make a world of difference, and it means you can access it from any other device, and if your laptop breaks or anything like that, or if you forget it or whatever. So that's a great way to do it, and you can see when you made different changes, and but I know it's whatever works for you. I think the big thing with this is it's about what works for you. You could do it completely differently to somebody else, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong way to do it.
No.
And it might be especially, I suppose what we're talking about here is probably when you're getting really more into the very in-depth writing stage, whereas I suppose especially when you're first, second year, or even coming up to third year, and you might have multiple assignments on the go, folders mightn't be the way that works for you. It might be that you mind map everything. It might be that like we have, again, there's a couple of other applications like OneNote and Evernote are ones that are nearly more like a scrapbook. And if you're doing something that's more project work as opposed to a big written piece, you can put PDFs and PowerPoints in there. You can put audio files. You can annotate on them. That's a big thing as well. If it's just about your slides for Blackboard, there's apps now where you can annotate right on the slide, but still keep all that stuff together. But it's about doing that from the outset so that you're building it as you go. And then when you're getting into the much more in-depth stuff, it'll get to the points that we're kind of saying. But I don't know if I guess for the younger years, you're probably looking at a lot of competing deadlines as opposed to one massive deadline. And I think that's a little bit different. So I don't know if you guys have any other tips around that kind of side of the earlier stages.
Yeah, I actually think that's a very good point. And that can happen, doesn't it, when you start answering questions, you kind of relate it back to your own experience. I kind of empathize. I really empathize with, multiple assignments happening at the one time, because I am a one task horse. So I don't necessarily really have any advice about that. I know, for example, even working with the students, that some of them can manage a couple of assignments at the one time, whereas for me personally, I can only work on one assignment, finish it. So I don't really have any guidance on that regard. I think it kind of does come back to your point, which is whatever works for you. But I guess how you organize or manage your time is really going to help in that regard.
I think that it's a tough one when there is competing assignments, and I know students generally often struggle with it, and it's important not to focus on one assignment over another, because they might be just weighted the exact same for those specific modules. I suppose going back into the time management, and when you're allocating time as to what you're doing with it, maybe if there is 2 or 3 assignments, maybe, or say 2 assignments, maybe allocating the mornings to work on one and allocating the afternoons to work on the other. But it is hard to do that. But if you're going to focus on one totally, then it's important to make sure that there is enough time for the other one. So really starting early is a huge part of it, and having that diary up to date so that that they're all coming in at the one time. Like I would be like Muireann, I definitely would like to focus on one thing at a time. And if you lean in that way to something, then it's really important that you don't delay starting, that you have your diary, that they're all coming in. And if you're allocating a week to each thing, then that you get that document more or less finished within that week, and then make sure that the same amount of time is allocated for the next one. You have to be, and it's easy to get carried away with not. I think if you're struggling to get over the line with one of them, sometimes it's a case that stepping back from that topic area just for a brief time, the other topic might be a bit of a distraction, that you can just organize sources for it. That can be helpful. But I wouldn't, you know, so again, it's what works. It's what works for you. It's finding out, how do I do this and what's the best way, and how do I manage this along with whatever else is going on. Like a lot of undergraduate students might be doing their courses full time, then many others might be coming through lifelong learning and they're not just doing it full time. Well, they're technically doing it full time, but they're doing it alongside working full time and managing a lot of other stuff. So it's really important that you don't sort of lose sight of that. You don't want to lose marks for something, and it's not easy to do. Like I definitely agree with Muireann on. I am definitely one thing at a time, but I have to be really careful as part of that process that I leave enough time for the other, so that that work doesn't suffer.
And I guess finding out, sorry, go on.
No, they're very good points.
Yeah, I think finding out, like you say, if you are going to break up your day, maybe make sure that you kind of pair two assignments together that are a bit different. Like if one's a presentation or one's group work and then a written assignment, it's a little bit easier to move between those two, I think, than two big written assignments where you're kind of, you know, but that might be different for someone else. I think, no, I want to stay in this kind of writing mode. I'll do the presentation on its own at the end. Or so it is. There's a lot of trial and error, but I think the two things are: check in with yourself. Are you just doing busy work? Are you spending an hour just organizing your folders because you don't want to face the fact that you have so much to do? You know, are you procrastinating? Are you overwhelmed to the point that you're ignoring it all? As long as you're doing something, you'll be building the skills and you'll be bringing it all together. But checking in, like, is this actually useful? Do I need to read this 10th article before I start writing? You know, so, and breaking it down into small tasks, whatever it might be. So unfortunately there's no right or wrong, but it's just make sure you're focusing, I suppose, and checking in with yourself.
And actually, just in relation to that, I am thinking to myself, the other thing that I have noticed is if there's a task that I absolutely hate, i.e. reference lists, what I did was I would, in that regard, I would kind of allocate an hour every day to get my reference list done, you know. So that was also a thing. So it wasn't, I'm just thinking about it now, you know, coming up to the end, it wasn't necessarily that I was just writing one thing, you know. So I also, like, I had to do a presentation and an article and stuff. So yes, within the day, I might have the morning redrafting a chapter, maybe an hour doing a PowerPoint presentation, and then an hour doing the reference list. But it was all about very, very clear timetables, because otherwise I still wouldn't have that reference list done.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different, I suppose, approaches to that. Some people say, eat the frog, you do the hard thing first.
Yeah.
And you leave the, you know, like you leave the stuff that maybe comes more naturally to when you're at a point where you're probably more stressed and have less time. Maybe that's just, but yeah, again, you maybe just tip away at the hard stuff a bit at a time. So it's about trial and error.
It can be useful to, with the reference list as well, even allocating that time. But I have found too that I encourage students, and I use this approach myself when I'm doing assignments for courses that I have done. Literally having my assignment and then having a separate document for the reference list, and do my references as I write. So if I'm using citation, well, then I format the reference in Harvard or APA at the same time, because we're tired at the end of of presenting a piece of work, and you don't see the errors. Like even when I went back and after I'd submitted my PhD and looked at it, or even if I've looked at assignments I have submitted, and then I've come away and thought, my God, I never even noticed that mistake, because you become so engaged with it, you actually don't see the errors, you know. So that's what I suppose it's important, particularly with college work, that try, if you can get it finished a day or two beforehand, and then have a read with a gap of a day, you might
Yes.
see other errors that, you know, you wouldn't have noticed after working weeks at.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
need those fresh eyes.
I think fresh eyes is it. If you have the luxury of after you finally finished it and you can leave it to read it with fresh eyes, it is so helpful.
Absolutely. We'll move on to question 4. Muireann, this one.
Okay. Is it important to have a strategy around organisation and time management, and if so, why?
So again, we've kind of touched on this, haven't we? But I guess it's, yeah, do you have it from the outset? Do you have a strategy that you stick to, or is it something that develops over time? Or
I think it's best to have a strategy around both from the start. And the reason I say that is because if you have the good organized, there's sort of a lot of overlap and interweaving between all the different strategies that we use. And you're actually setting up your schedule and your time and your organization to suit what works for you. So like, you know, and for me, it can, if you get into the habit of doing something a certain way, you get more skilled at that habit. And then you get faster at that habit. So the organization part of organizing your resources becomes second nature, and that saves time. Whereas if you're starting something fresh every time and falling away from it and then think, oh, and then there's one folder with 30 different articles and you haven't named them and you haven't a clue what's in them, well, then that takes even more time to try and figure out what they are and rename them so that you can find them or even allocate them to thematic folders. I think studying isn't easy. It's enjoyable, but there can be challenges with it because we are people, we're humans, we have to balance an awful lot of stuff around it. We don't know what's going on in any student's life. They might have their own personal stuff, health stuff they're dealing with. There might be stuff around them that's happening. And I think to make it easier for you to manage this section of your life, having those skills and taking the time to develop those skills can only hold you in good stead. And particularly if you're in first year and second year, I think there's been some really good tips here this morning that if you can even take 2 or 3 of them and apply them in the course of your journey, it will definitely just make your study life, your study journey, your learning journey easier.
Yeah, Muireann, would you have anything to add to that?
I suppose, you know, kind of what and apologize, the dog is throwing himself against the door here. I suppose what I kind of want to really say is that as an undergraduate, I had awful habits. Like, you know, I was a lifelong learner, you know, so it was really a case of trying to fit stuff in around, you know, working full time and family demands and all of that. And I definitely, for the first couple of years, very much struggled, you know, and had very kind of bad habits. Just in terms of sitting in the bed trying to get work done, and the implications of that, you know, and of course now the PhD, I was privileged because I was able to do it full time, and that made all the difference. But just to say, the kind of bad habits I had was really because I didn't really have the skill to allocate time as such. Looking back, I could have, but, you know, like, I don't know. But if there was one thing I can say is that I was by no means an expert in time management whatsoever as an undergrad. But I did feel that in terms of kind of looking after my well-being and my mental health, which is really kind of fundamental to your quality of learning, that's why I feel that kind of some of these tips. And equally, one thing I also have noticed was, like, what the message that seems to be coming through is there's a lot of different strategies for different people. And so therefore, if you're listening to another student who is getting up at like 4 in the morning or whatever else, that may not be for you. But kind of the message that I could bring across is it's very much trial and error. But if you can try to kind of build the foundations of that early in your learning journey, it will stand to you, and I would imagine make the whole thing a lot more enjoyable.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'd have to, I think that's a really good point. And I suppose if I look back to my undergrad, I was in the opposite situation, straight from school, full time, no other demands. And I struggled. I had such bad habits, really struggled, overwhelmed, you know, ignoring things. And like that, just didn't have the skills. And I think the thing you learn as you go on, kind of like you're saying, it's nearly like you learn what your bad habits are, and you just recognize them and can stop them earlier. So it's not really, of course, some people are just naturally gifted at this, like anything, but it's most of us don't have a natural ability for it, because at the end of the day, like we're all saying, we'd prefer to focus on one task. This multitasking thing is not easy for most people, all these competing demands, and that's like not including life, that's just even within just college, the competing demands that you have. So I think it's really about recognizing and maybe just having to enforce what's going to curb you from those bad habits or what's going to improve them. So like that, am I procrastinating? Okay, sit down and just do it. You know, am I ignoring deadlines? Okay, set them, put it in a calendar, color code it, work backwards, have a plan, those kind of things, you know, and you're going against the grain and you're kind of pulling yourself out. And it's really, you have to just like regulate, I suppose, isn't it? It's learning that ability to self-regulate and discipline yourself with a few key strategies, you know, and recognizing, okay, I know that I'm going to sit and do loads of reading and not actually write. Okay, so I'm not going to let myself do that. I'm going to set a Pomodoro timer and I'm going to just start, and I'll stop in an hour, but just do that, you know. So it's a couple of key things like that I think can really, really help. Yeah.
And also rewarding yourself, you know, and that might be so daft. That might be like, you know, lighting a candle while you're working, or I don't know, but doing it in a nice kind of environment. Have a nice notebook, have a nice pen, you know, I don't know what it is. Meet, have your hour with your work and then go and meet someone for a coffee. But it is about, you know, because yes, we have said it is about doing stuff that you don't want to do. And so therefore, naturally, reward yourself along the way.
Back to you then, Ciara. Question 5.
Are there any techniques or tools that we haven't already mentioned that you would recommend?
Okay, so this is more of a general one to...
I have one technique, and this I still have the same issue from since I was an undergrad to right now, and that is on receiving feedback. You know, and so I don't care what anybody says. When feedback comes first, there is an emotional reaction. That's it, right? There is. And so kind of the strategy that I have learned in that regard is when you read, you get the feedback first. Never mind that you've put your heart and soul into the work. Never mind that. I can't remember which supervisor it was that told me this, but it's about your head and your heart. And so you have to kind of let the feedback arrive here. However, if the feedback does go here, which 99.999% of the time it does for me, what I have learned to do is just to completely walk away. So, and I mean physically, like, because usually the feedback comes written, so I'm not walking away from the person who's given it to me. So usually my feedback arrives written. And what I need to do in that regard is I need to either go for a walk, I need to go for a run if it's very heavy, straight down a hill, and then by the time I come back up the hill, everything has settled for me. But the number one strategy that has helped me in this entire journey that I've had is to acknowledge that everybody, you know, at some stage we get, you know, feedback is tough. You know, it can be great too. I shouldn't be a negative Nelly, but how I manage feedback in general, and sometimes it can be, when you see it first, it's very, very heavy and you go, oh my God. And so in that regard, what you just read it and it lands whatever way it lands. So if it just stays in your head, okay, you're great. If it goes to your heart, you're still great. Go off, breathe, do whatever you need to do, come back, be it a couple of hours, be it a couple of days, and I've done that too. Then put your head in and say, this is not a personal attack on you. This is to get your work over the line. So that's my number one strategy.
That's a great tip. Yeah, and especially, well, this won't be going out till next week, but you know, this is Mental Health Week, and that whole piece of resilience and being able, yeah, that's a really, really good point of, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Muireann. It's feedback can be incredibly hard to take on board. And I think it's also to think about the feedback in a different way as well, like taking Muireann's strategy, but also looking at it as a way, this is a way to improve what I'm doing and try and view it in that way. I often tell, when people ask me about feedback, how do I feel about it? And I say, well, I put on a coat of armor and I let it bounce on and off. And then I go through it. But the important thing with the feedback is to make sure if there's something that I don't understand, that I go back and I ask whoever has given me that feedback to either expand on it, or I do a little bit of research around that myself and find out, well, what does that actually mean, what they're trying to tell me, if I would prefer, if I want to do it independently. Another thing that we have mentioned a little bit about the well-being. Well-being is huge as part of the journey that we're on. And it really needs to be incorporated as a technique or a tool throughout our day, be it you're working, studying part-time and working full-time, or studying full-time, regardless of the life journey you're taking that's including academia. It's really important to incorporate, make time for you as part of the process, and reward yourself when you have submitted an assignment. Treat yourself to that bun afterwards if it was really difficult to get it over the line. Catch up with your friends, and even, like, you know, working with your peers in the course that you're doing. Talk to each other about your experiences, share ideas, because this is the journey. The more you talk about your discipline, the more fluent you get in talking about it. And that also helps in assignments and whatever you're doing for it. I think for me, that would be the one it's that engagement, having conversation around it, around topic areas is important to help that process. And even when you're taking breaks, doing assignments, always remember that as you step away from your work, subconsciously your brain is digesting. So never feel guilty about that 10 or 15 minute walk, because if something was confusing you beforehand, I can guarantee halfway through the walk, light bulb moment, and when you get back to the desk, it'll just all be clear for you to go forward with whatever idea you have.
Yeah, to think of it that way actually is so useful, because it can get to the point where you're thinking, I can't take 10 or 15 minutes, but actually when you're away from devices and you're away from information coming in, that's sometimes when the penny drops and actually things start to make sense.
Yeah,
I just thought of another one there, which is the use of a reflective diary. And this is the thing, and I've been saying this to the first years that I'm working with now. The thing is that there's new knowledge, there's new knowledge there. And the new knowledge is coming from everywhere. It's coming from the idea that you have. And so if you're reading a paper or something like that, and if you don't necessarily agree with it, or equally if you think, it's not fully developed, but you don't know what you mean by that just yet, take note of that. Like, it's just in your reflective diary. Take note of that. I mean, and I know this from doing the PhD, because I came in as a practitioner, so I had a different form of expertise in academic And when I read academic papers, it didn't totally always make sense to me, but equally I wasn't able to articulate what didn't make sense to me. And I found from just using a reflective diary, and it could be literally something like, I don't agree with this, or question mark, or, but what about this, or what about that? And I have found that, you know, those reflective diaries have actually really, you know, stood to me in terms of creating new knowledge for the sector. So yeah, it was just something that, but don't be scared. Don't be scared if you have a new idea, or don't be scared if you don't agree with something, because there's definitely something in that, you know, and that bit of knowledge, we want to hear it.
Absolutely. And just to go back to your point about the feedback thing, and we will be doing a discussion like this when it comes closer to assessment time, so I suppose we've kind of nearly moved into there, but it can be so hard when you have invested so much energy in doing so much work, and like that you're keeping on top of things, and then at the end of it all, like say, you can get this, we've all had feedback that has been disappointing at times, and it, you know, you're probably already like pretty worn thin by the time you're receiving it, so that you don't have much to draw on at that point, and it can feel so all-consuming when it's very grade focused and it's assessment focused and deadline focused. But just, I suppose, to say in retrospect, the thing that's nice to keep in mind is what you walk away from. You will forget those exact words of that feedback, probably, but what you do keep is that the breadth of knowledge that you've developed. And really, if the feedback informs that, like, just because you might get something that isn't as positive as you hoped or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean you haven't done a good job, or you haven't done a huge amount of work, or you haven't got a huge amount of learning from that piece. But maybe somewhere you fell down in conveying what you'd learned, or you just ran out of time, whatever that happens, you've still done probably, you know, the best. But you can reevaluate and take it on board for how you approach it next time. But it doesn't mean that the whole thing has been lost, or that there's been no benefit to doing that work in the way that you did it. Do you know what I mean? It's all contributing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, I have many first-hand experiences of that, but I'm just thinking recently, you know, of a paper that I submitted, and, you know, the first draft of that paper versus the final draft. And I remember thinking the first draft was amazing, and then it got absolutely hopped off of. But the final draft is so slick, you know. So you know, so like that, you know, I have forgotten about, you know, I had to do a lot of walks for that paper.
Nice.
But the final draft, you know, I'm really happy with it. So yeah, feedback serves a purpose.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, I just have to admire, Muireann, that your coping strategies for that are to go out for a run. My God, I wish that was.
That's after I've eaten, you know, a whole slice pan.
Okay, good. So I think, Ciara, did you want to add any final thoughts? Or are we all kind of good
No,
in terms of...
I think that's everything.
Yeah.
I find at times too, like sometimes students, we think that people have it in for us, and I have actually showed my own feedback to students 10 years down the line and told them, look, this is what I'm still getting, you know, to let them understand that, you know, it is a process, and this journey doesn't stop, even when they're starting, not to see the feedback as a learning tool that they can learn from to improve. Because really all we are doing as lecturers is to try and give you feedback to get your marks higher, you know, and that's really our intention with the feedback. And then if you can even apply a little bit of that feedback, it can improve the next assignment that you're in. Yeah, I have nothing else. Oh, you could talk about this topic area all day, but I suppose it's generally what works for you as the individual, and it's about enjoying the journey, you know, as best. That's really important, and learning never stops.
Absolutely, never. Yeah, and it is a journey. It's not just a final destination. Okay, well, thank you so much, and much appreciated, and goodbye.
You're very welcome.